Hi students, welcome to Year 11 Biology and Module 4 Ecosystem Dynamics. This is our penultimate video, number 19, and we're going to have two looks at restoration. The first one, and this video, will focus on mining sites. We need to be able to investigate practices used to restore damaged ecosystems, country or place, and one example that we need to focus on is mining sites. It's very tricky to try and give you a quick overview of mining in Australia, and certainly some of the ways in which restoration has been mandated, usually by governments, to ensure that the mining industry is trying to think about the environmental impacts of mining. Because this is a huge industry, it's very, very important financially in Australia. It also creates lots of jobs and it also creates some controversy as well. There are three main ways in which mining operations are undertaken. The first is the open pit mine. And the open pit mines are probably the one that you'd be most familiar with. You can see great scars on the landscape often as the whole of the surface is open and exposed, which makes it a little bit easier to get to the mine. And obviously trying to rehabilitate after open pit mining has some significant challenges. And yet one company has looked at a very clever and effective way of being able to reclaim former open pit mine. So we'll have a look at that in this video. Underground mining is another type of mining. Often that can include things like longwall or room and pillar. And depending on which way which type of mining is occurring, there certainly can be issues associated with mine subsidence. And mine subsidence is a potential problem in areas that have formerly been mined because there's that danger of collapse. So thinking about how you're going to undo the impact of some of what has happened during the mining processes is one important consideration in the mining industry. And underground mining, access, safety, and then rehabilitation have some additional challenges. There's also drilling, onshore and offshore drilling. This is probably the least invasive in terms of the impact on ecosystems. And nonetheless, it still is another area that we need to just quickly touch on as we go past. So this is just a quick overview of some of the different types of mining that we have in Australia, and I want to contextualize these in terms of rehabilitation. So as I said, the first one, and probably the one that a lot of people are most familiar with, the sort of mines that we see because they're easiest to see, are these open cut mines. They leave a large footprint on the land, and the consequence of that is what you do after you finish mining all of the financially viable products of the mine. What do you then do with these great holes in the ground afterwards? And what happens to the ecosystems that are sitting on top of these mines when you actually find that there's some valuable ore or mineral in there that you want to extract? The process of excavation, which can involve blasting, the surface works, the roads that need to be created, all contribute to environmental issues. They can create things like habitat loss, land clearance obviously, and this can have a devastating impact on the organisms that rely on the ecosystems that are built on top of these deposits that are later then mined. In New South Wales, we have the Mining Act, the Clear Air Act, and environmental legislation that regulates the mining sector. This probably a lot of mining companies got through probably till about the 1970s without too much required of them in the area of environmental management. But we now know a lot more about the impact of human activity on the ecosystems of the world and the biosphere in general. And so a lot more legislation now exists in order to try and keep accountable companies that are going to be involved in these sorts of activities in terms of their long-term plans, what they're going to be doing before, during, and after the mining process. As I said, in underground mining, the surface isn't quite so obviously exposed, so it is possible that you can continue to underground mine while still leaving the surface relatively untouched. So there's a little bit of a tick for some of the surface ecosystem that may be able to continue. This is Also going to potentially involve blasting as you're trying to blow apart sections of the rock in order to expose the particular ore or minerals that you're looking for. And so therefore we do have some issues associated with tunnel collapses and land subsidence, which I talked about already. Two main types I've also mentioned, room and pillar, which is usually a more reinforced roofing than you find in longwall mines, and therefore there's probably a slightly better prospect or a lower likelihood of collapse happening in the room and pillar type of underground mining than there is in longwall mining. Nevertheless, this is an issue. In addition to that, some toxic compounds are often associated with mining, and that's going to depend on the type of material that is being mined and also the methods that are used in order to extract the ores. Heavy metals like lead, mercury, cadmium can be not just present in the mine, which can have an impact on the health of the workers, but also can leach out into the surrounding water table, maybe find its way into rivers or other water systems, streams and lakes, and can therefore have a devastating effect on the animals and plants that maybe are living in the area, perhaps downstream, downhill from the mine site. This sort of contamination of water can pollute a region, and obviously that's going to have a significant impact in terms of the balance in the ecosystems. Now, when we're talking about drilling, we're talking about the smallest footprint of the three different types of mining that occurs. There's still the possibility for groundwater contamination, so there's still a possibility of some of those toxic materials, toxic chemicals actually getting down and entering the system and getting into the groundwater or ultimately into the surface waters that may be percolating out further downhill from where the drilling site is. There can be contamination through fracking, and also there are methane gas emissions that can also be part of the process of drilling. Not too much to talk about in terms of drilling. There's obviously a little bit of destabilization that can occur on the rocks that are being drilled, and therefore that can reverberate through the ecosystem. But of the three types of mining methods, drilling does have the smallest footprint and tends to have the least impact in ecosystems. So what then are we talking about? We're talking about mine reclamation. We're talking about how these sorts of stakeholders can work together. This includes the traditional owners of the lands upon which the mines are being constructed, are being used, or are being proposed even. There's a lot more legislation now that tries to involve all of the potential stakeholders in discussions about what's going to happen during and after the mining processes. And certainly one of the big things that's happening now is the legislated requirement for mining companies to be restoring land that has been mined to a natural or economically usable state. So this doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be returned to pristine wilderness, as perhaps it was prior to the mining process, but there must be some way that land can be reused in some way or another, and I'll show you one example of that. Importantly, the planning of the whole mine reclamation process needs to occur prior to the initiation of the mine construction. So before any blasting occurs, any drilling occurs, it's very important that this whole process of what do we do once we've gone through the life of the mine, what are we then going to do? And those conversations have to be had right at the beginning of the process. So ideally we want productive ecosystems. So that can involve agricultural lands that are then constructed, but ideally they would be maybe forest trees that are being planted in order to reconstruct some sort of landscape that will support an ecosystem not necessarily identical to the one that was originally there, but perhaps one that will encourage immigration into the area and hopefully over time a re-establishment of some level of productive ecosystem. And one other area where mines are being reclaimed is in the area of industrial and municipal resources. And there's one very interesting project that's happening just a little bit further south of Sydney, just just south of Goulburn, in fact. So the Viola Woodlawn project is a good example to look at in terms of the way that mines can be reclaimed. So you can see the original mine, which was, I think, about the 1950s to 1970s. I think this mine was originally the parent company or the company that became Rio Tinto had first access to this mine. They were mining metals, and then I think it transferred ownership through till about the late 1990s. And since then, it's now been reclaimed as part of the Viola Woodlawn Waste to Energy project. So there is a range of different types of uses that has been made of this area. Some of that is for landfill, but it's landfill that's been sanitized, so sanitary landfill. And then also there is a transfer to biofuel or some sort of biogeneration of energy. So some of the waste products, some of the methane that's released during the decomposition of a lot of domestic waste can also be reclaimed and used as a source of energy. So this site is being massively repurposed. You can see the before and after ideas about how we reclaim the mine, how we refill the space, how we can set perhaps another ecosystem to restart, to reform over time, and perhaps also a clever idea of how waste can be managed as well. Mining in Australia is a big industry, and it's certainly something that we can't do justice to in 10 odd minutes of a video. So it's definitely worth looking for some examples to help you to understand exactly what sort of legislation is involved, particularly in your local area, for the rehabilitation of sites after mining. Thanks for watching.